Okay, so remember I said last time, we have these two options, and also that either of them seems to create problems for Euthyphro. So this is often called the Euthyphro dilemma, even though, Euthyphro is not the person who comes up with it. Euthyphro wouldn't much like it, right? More accurate would be Socrates' dilemma for Euthyphro, but whatever. Commonly called the Euthyphro dilemma. My guess is because it appears in the dialogue, the Euthyphro, not because Euthyphro himself comes up with it, which he certainly doesn't, right? So let's talk about these two options and why they are problematic for Euthyphro, why they're problematic for divine command theory generally. So option one seems deeply problematic due to arbitrariness. And this pops out in a lot of ways, which we'll talk about. But they all kind of trace back, they all come back to this idea that there's an arbitrariness here, and that's going to create some problems. So remember, option one is that the only thing pious actions have in common is that they are loved by the gods. If you want to translate this into terms of divine command theory, you might say the only thing right actions have in common is that God commands them. Now, to see why this runs us into a lot of problems, we have to go back and think about, remember these two questions that a rules-based theory needs to be able to answer. And the first question is, how do we know what the rules are? And the second one, which I said is going to, connect to the first one, is why are they important? And the arbitrariness that you get if you take option one seems to leave you unable to come up with a good answer to either of these questions. So the first problem is, if all there is to God's command is that he wills them, then we cannot rule out silly or even awful commands, right? When I was talking about Pascal's wager, the problems with it, I brought up a sort of humorous example by one of my old professors, Jim Cargyle. What if an angel of the Lord appears and tells me to burn down the bus stop? And as I said, if this happened, I wouldn't be like, okay, I'm going to go get a gas can and some matches and we will smite the Greyhound station, right? That is not what I would think, right? I would think, okay, I'm losing my mind or someone is playing a trick on me, right? Well, if all there is to God's command is he commands them, I really wouldn't have any ground to say that, because who's to say God wouldn't command something that seems crazy, right? And it's not just that, you might think God could command something absolutely awful, like if all there is to murder is wrong, is that God tells us not to do it. If God changed his mind, murder would be fine, right? And if someone tells us, well, yeah, okay, God's changed his mind, now he's decided murder's perfectly fine, none of us would take a guy like that seriously. Hopefully, right? Maybe I'm a little cynical, like these guys always seem to be able to get a few cult followers, right? But most of us would just think, no, we're not gonna, no. But why not? If there's nothing to God's commands except, well, he forbids it or he commands it, why couldn't he change his mind, right? In the same way, if there's nothing, all the hammer and the pen have in common are there on my desk, I can just as easily get one of them, take it off my desk, put it somewhere else, right? If I just get a whim, I don't like having a hammer on my desk anymore, pick it up, move it. If God just has a whim, murder is now okay, why couldn't murder now not only be not wrong, but even morally commanded, right? Now, practically no believer is going to take this seriously. The point is not that belief in God or religion commits you to these things. That's not my point. My point is rather that if all you can say about morally right is that God commands it, it seems impossible to rule them out. There also seems on this horn of the dilemma. We often speak, philosophers will talk about a dilemma, we'll speak of the horns of the dilemma. You think of something like a bull, right? You're going to get stuck on either one. So on this horn of the dilemma, we also don't have a good answer as to why it's so important to follow God's commands, right? I mean, the most obvious answer, in a lot of the monotheistic religions, a lot of the Abrahamic religions is like, well, if you don't do it, God will send you to hell. I don't think Judaism actually believes in hell. I'm not a religious scholar. I know Islam and Christianity do, though, right? But look, that doesn't seem like a moral answer, right? If I tell you you shouldn't murder because there's a good chance you're going to get caught, and if you get caught, you're going to go to jail, that's a pretty good reason not to murder, but it doesn't look like a moral reason, right? And if I tell you, well, you shouldn't murder because God doesn't like murder, so he's going to send you to hell, might be a good reason not to do it. It doesn't look like a moral reason, right? Doesn't look like there's a good moral reason to follow the commands. And on top of this, blindly and unquestioningly following rules doesn't seem to fit with human freedom. It looks like we need a good answer as to why we should follow these commands, right? I'll give you guys an example, right? I used to work at a truck stop way back when I first started college. I think I might have mentioned this. My mom decided that I was going to pay for some of my own college, which fine and good. I think that's a good thing. She also hoped it would instill, I don't know. Anyway, I don't think I learned the lesson she thought I would learn, right? And I remember when I worked at the truck stop, God, there were so many rules, right? And one of the rules was we had these stupid, I'm going to put this in scare quotes, cappuccino machines, right? I mean, I think inside there was like some weird powder and it mixed it with hot water. And it tasted like what it was, which was like some god-awful chemical concoction. But there was a rule put down by the owner of the store, who I never saw. He was like Oz in The Wizard of Oz. Danny the Great and Terrible, right? We never met this guy. But one of the rules in the store was like every night if you worked the graveyard shift, which I usually did, you were supposed to clean the nozzles of the cappuccino machine. I never did this, right? I'm like, I'm not doing that. You're paying me minimum wage. I am not gonna disassemble this stupid machine, soak these nozzles and wipe them out with a rag. It's like, no. You want me to do it, pay me more than minimum wage, right? I'm not doing that. But I worked with this guy who was just outraged. He's like, well, we're supposed to do it. And I'm just like, yeah, but why? Well, because we're supposed to do it. It's one of the rules. Like, it's in the employee handbook. And I'm like, yeah, but why? Well, it's in the employee handbook. And I'm like, I know that, but why should I care? They're not going to catch us. It's not like Danny, the owner of the store, is going to come in every day and like disassemble the machine, look in. Why should I care? And I judge this guy negatively for caring, right? It's like, well, yeah, the owner of the store tells me to do it, but why? And even if he had a good reason for doing it, why should I care, right? Yes, it's a rule, but tell me why I should follow it. And if you blindly and unquestioningly follow a rule without asking why it's important, without asking why you should do it, you might not be as my wife puts it, cantankerous as I am. But, you can think of rules in other situations. Before you go and follow them, it's good that you have an answer as to why they're important. And if you have to stop with, God just told you to do it, it's not a good answer, right? And again, that is not to say that there's not a good answer. If you say, well, you know, in my case at the truck stop, if you say, well, he pays us really well, which he didn't. He treats us really well, which he didn't. But if you had answers like that, if you gave me good reasons to follow the rules, I might be like, okay, I'll do it. And if you say, as many religious believers, well, God loves us all, God created us, you start saying stuff like that, then that might give us a good reason to follow God's rules. But I want you to notice what you're doing. You're giving reasons beyond the rules themselves. Seems like you should be able to do that, but once you start doing it, you've actually started to take option 2. And even many theologians, especially Catholic theologians, Protestants are more divided on this, but Catholics are almost unanimous that option 1 is the better one. Protestants, there's some argument, but at least in the Catholic tradition, overwhelmingly, they don't like option 1. They think you have to say more about this. You have to find some feature of the actions that explains why God would choose them, right? God loves us, and these actions are for the good of his creation, right? God is just, and he doesn't want us to do unjust things, so he hates injustice. Fine. I actually believe things like that, right? But once you start saying that, you have taken option 2. You are now saying there is something deeper here, something in common beyond God just chose one way or the other. And I actually think that's the better move here. But I want you guys to notice Euthyphro wouldn't like it, right? Euthyphro thinks that he's special because he has this knowledge of God. He has this direct pipeline nobody else has. Well, if there's some deeper feature of the actions that explains why God or the gods like them or don't like them, well, you don't need Euthyphro. You just need to be able to think in terms of those features. Now, the deeper issue, this isn't a religion or theology class. We're going to, we'll make contact at a few points like here. Don't want to get too deeply into theological debates, though. My deeper issue here is that rules-based theories need to give good answers to these 2 questions. And when you look at the Euthyphro, we see that at least for option 1, divine command theory doesn't seem to be able to do it. All right, we will get into Kantianism shortly. I do want to take one more slight detour. I want to talk a little bit about natural law theory. This is another way of setting the moral rules. Tries to avoid some of the problems with divine command theory. I'm going to suggest that natural law theory has some of its own problems, and I think keeping these problems in mind will help us to understand a little bit better some of the points where Kant seems like weirdly insistent about things when we get to Kant. So I will talk about that next, and then after that we will finally get into Kant and Kantianism.